Peter Paul Rubens was born in 1577 in Siegen, Germany. He was there because his father, who was a lawyer from Antwerp, was living in a sort of exile there after being imprisoned for adultery. He was pardoned eventually, and the family moved to Cologne. Again, he was under strict orders not to go into the Netherlands. And he died there, and the mother and sons then returned to Antwerp in 1587. Peter Paul Rubens began to study painting when he was about 15, apprenticing with artists working in the Mannerist style. He became a master in the Antwerp Painters Guild in 1598, and then, as was the custom, he left for an Italian study tour in 1600. This turned out to be a very extended study tour. Such a tour was considered a virtual necessity for any aspiring northern artist, and he went first to Venice. That was the usual first stop, and in Venice he met the current Duke of Mantua, Vincenzo de Gonzaga. He entered the service of the Duke, and this fortunate turn of events was certainly the most important of his life as a painter. Remember what we've said about the court of Mantua in the 15th century when Mantegna was court painter there. And it was not simply that Mantegna's great frescoed chamber was there, but also a collection of masterpieces of painting that had continued to increase during the 16th century. To this collection, and to the richness of Mantuan art, Rubens himself would also contribute greatly during 8 years of service there. He traveled widely for the Duke and on his own account, visiting Florence, Rome, Genoa, and Spain, partly in a diplomatic function, among other places, and producing important paintings not only in Mantua but in Rome, which are still there, and in Genoa, that consolidated his reputation as a major artist. In 1608, he learned by mail of his mother's illness and returned as rapidly as he could to Antwerp, but arrived too late. She had died before his arrival. He never resumed his service in Mantua because he was invited by the Archdukes of the Southern Netherlands, Albert and Isabella, to become their court painter. So much did they want him to be their court painter that they did not require him to live at court. He could live in a separate city and have his own establishment. We last spoke of the political situation in the Netherlands at the end of Lecture 26 on Peter Bruegel, when I reminded you of the invasion of the Netherlands by the armies of Philip II of Spain. Philip was intent upon crushing the Protestant rebellion, and the invasion of 1567 was brutal and unyielding in its attempt to impose orthodoxy. The northern Netherlands organized in armed opposition in 1868, and that was the beginning, as we've said, of the 80 Years' War. And although it was indeed 80 years before a final peace treaty was reached, a temporary de facto peace had arrived much earlier, and the northern Netherlands flourished while the south, which of course remained under Spanish Habsburg rule, languished. One reason was the blockade of the Scheldt River, which almost totally closed Antwerp to trade. But Isabella, co-regent of the southern Netherlands, was the daughter of Philip II, so the territory was supported by the wealth of Spain. Aristocratic and Catholic patronage was abundant, and the opportunities for Rubens were virtually limitless. This is a portrait of Peter Paul Rubens with his first much-loved wife, Isabella Brandt, painted about 1609. It's in Munich today in the Alte Pinakothek. It's their wedding portrait. Mannerist, still in composition, if you look at the serpentine line, which comes down between the figures. Wonderful composition because you have this diagonal running up through the hands and legs here. But it's Rubensian, if Mannerist in composition, and also, by the way, in the sheen, the kind of gloss to the paint surface, that's Mannerist as well. But it's Rubensian in its robustness and its optimism. It might have seemed gratuitous to speak of the love they had for one another, but it's not, because such marriages, love matches, were not all that common, and these were a pair, intellectually and emotionally. There are, in his first great work, in the Netherlands after his return, many echoes of Italy. This is the Raising of the Cross, a triptych, a huge altarpiece painted in 1609, 1610, today in the Antwerp Cathedral, but not painted for there. And later I'll show you a painting of the interior of the church and the location that it originally had. I want to talk to you first, though, about the linking of these three panels into a unified composition. Not that it's not been seen before, but he does it in such a dramatic way. In other words, the space here is contiguous and is continuous between the wings and the centerpiece of the altar of the whole altar. But it's done in with such strong drama. On the left-hand side, rather quietly, standing in the upper portion of the wing, you have St. John and the Virgin Mary in dark blue. Then you have a group of people who are observing the raising of the cross, looking at it with various reactions. The most dominant figure here, and prominently placed for a reason, is this mother and child who leans back and who's a large, the kind of figure so often associated with Rubens, very full-bodied. He didn't invent this figure style, but he favored it a great deal. But the point is that she, in the lower left corner, is at about, if you're in front of the altarpiece today, where your eye strikes immediately. So you're pulled right into the painting by that large figure in a red dress, and that and her gaze move you across into the other side. Originally, this whole painting was on a much higher platform, and as I say, I'll show you that when I can show you the interior of the church from which it came. The centerpiece of the Raising of the Cross is an astonishing composition, a great diagonal, sweeps right down from upper left to lower right. The cross, the people are straining, pulling at the cross to raise it. One wonders if he hadn't seen Caravaggio's work in Rome, in which such effort was being put into the raising of the cross of St. Peter. But this is even more than that. This is Michelangelesque, the feeling of huge bodies, muscular bodies, who are both the body of Christ and those who are struggling to raise him. Almost too heavy, it would seem, wouldn't it? But after all, I'm sure Rubens is saying something about the nature of the person that they are struggling to raise to his crucifixion. A large dog in the lower corner here serves much the purpose that the woman over here did, to introduce our eyes quickly into it, as does this figure with a very brilliant blue cloak around the lower part of his body and the upper part of the body leaning really against the picture surface, almost pushing out toward our space. And this strong triad of color of blue to red to the purple and silver over here, which frame the body of Christ. On the right-hand side, we have the soldier in charge of this. By the way, the two thieves who are being brought to be crucified with Christ are back here. One on the ground in foreshortening, these are his knees, and the other one still standing and being led in, while the centurion over here is on his beautiful horse in strong foreshortening, and with his baton gestures toward the central group and orders this action to continue. Look at the composition if you were to follow it from here. You have a descending diagonal which meets this rising diagonal here. The whole center panel, of course, is a large triangle, but it's extended beyond that. On the left-hand side, there is a triangle which moves in this fashion, or I suppose you could look at the whole thing as a large W going across all three wings. When one looks at a composition with these different sort of schematic ideas put over it, it's not to say it was composed that way by the artist. Artists are greater than that. It's a way of looking at it, to understand what makes it work and what gives it the great drama that it has, the great dramatization. And we're going to leave this now, so take a good look at this great memory of Italy, as it were. But I want you to see one source for this center figure, a work that oddly I haven't brought in to show you before. It's the famous Laocoon, the ancient Hellenistic sculpture, which had been excavated in 1505 with Michelangelo present at the time. And Michelangelo made use of it, as did others. It went right into the papal collection at the Vatican, and artists use this central figure in many ways in compositions thereafter. And I think without too much question, it is the main source for the torso of Christ on Rubens' cross.